Next up, we have Shaman. We talked about devolving missiles already in Mage, but in Shaman, this card is generally solid. Shaman, has both Shaman and Mage obviously have Hex and Polymorph for like silence type effects. Shaman additionally has Earthshock. So I do think there's at least a little bit less appeal of this there, but it is still, I think, just generally feels like it's a solid card. Even if your opponent doesn't necessarily have things that are like straight up buffed, like a silence effect can deal with. This can just shrink any kind of like mid-sized minion. I think it's just a good card. So I think we'll see a lot of devolving missiles. I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised to see like this showing up in Shaman decks playing more like Cobalt Spellkins along with this and like Fist. I know I'm going to be doing this. More one-cost spells that are actually like impactful to help go with Fist of Raiden to get your primes, Reliquary Prime in your deck. Boom, get them. Next up we have Diligent Note Taker, a 2-cost 2/3 with Spellburst. Return the spell to your hand. This is just real good, right? 2-cost 2/3. Fine, right? Like, this is something that you could, if you really wanted to, just play on turn 2. But you can Diligent Note Taker into burn spells. This can just like be an additional Lightning Bolt. This can be an additional Hex. This can be an additional Earthshock. This can be additional whatever. This is just a great card. Kragwa was obviously a super big version of this, right? Like, get the spells you played last turn. But Shaman, has a lot of really good but situational type spells, like Earth Shocks, whatever. But this with just like mass removal, this with like whatever, I think is, this with like Farsight, right? This is just like such a good card. Also with all of the Shaman spells that want you to have played a spell the previous turn, more ways to set up more spells with that, I think is also just really good. So yeah, this is, I think, just a fantastic card, good value, good utility, just great. This card is gonna see a lot of play. I think that Shaman has some of the best cards in this expansion. I think this is one of the just like most universally high quality Shaman cards for like just about any Shaman deck. Next up we have Groundskeeper. Talked about this with Druid, but with Shaman, I've heard people say like, oh, this would be good in like Quest Shaman. It is a battle cry, but it's a battle cry that requires you to have a spell that costs 5 or more, which in a lot of Quest Shaman decks, you don't really want to have very many spells at all because you want to be maximizing your battle cries. I do think this is very powerful in like a spell, control/spell Shaman. Those decks do suffer a little bit from not necessarily having great end game, kind of like ways to close out games, ways to win, but this is just, super strong, super powerful. Just obviously a really high-powered combination of stats and ability. So yeah, I mean, I think this is very likely to see a lot of play in any kind of controlling Shaman deck if they do exist, and I think that there's enough tools in this set to really give you the motivation to play them. Next up, we have Instructor Fireheart. This is a 3-cost 3/3 with battle cry. Discover a spell that costs 1 or more. If you play it this turn, repeat this effect. This is a really interesting card, right? This gives you a lot of utility, right? Discover a spell. And then discover a spell, possibly more spells, right? This could be like, you play this, you're like, okay, bolt you. This is like, a card that I think, much like the Spellburst guy that brings back your hand, the Note Taker, this is really powerful. It could be in control, it could be an aggressive deck. Like, this is just, I think, super good. It's a battle cry effect, right? This could just be, in a Quest Shaman deck. It could be in a control Shaman deck. It could be in a burn Shaman deck. It could be in a, whatever. This is just a super good card. I mean, people are playing like Vilpera Scoundrel, right? Like, this is, very much a dramatically more powerful version of Vilpera Scoundrel. So yeah, I think this card is just awesome, and we'll see tons of play in tons of different Shaman decks, and is a huge incentive to play Shaman because it's really good. Next up, we have Lightning Bloom. Gonna get this off the Instructor and just keep going. No, it's 1 or more, so you can't get Lightning Bloom off of Instructor and go nuts. But this is, obviously the Innervate that is shared with Druid. Very powerful. You can play this. You can like Lightning Bloom, Kael'thas, Eye of the Storm. Boom. Just get a ton of stuff into play right away. I think this is probably less powerful in Shaman. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm just thinking it's more powerful in Shaman, more powerful in Druid. I think it's probably more powerful in Druid because Druid can use it to ramp out ramp cards. But either way, it's just really good, right? And obviously, Shaman has ways that it actually utilizes Overload, right? You have things that give you upside for having Overload, and being able to like use this to ramp out big things when you're playing like an aggressive Shaman deck is really powerful. I just think this is just like pretty clearly a super good card in either class, and won't necessarily be like universally played in Shaman because you don't necessarily want this in like control, but will definitely see a lot of play. Next up, we have Molten Blast. Deal 2 damage, summon that many 1/1 elementals. So obviously this is a burn spell that scales with spell damage. We've seen some stuff, spell damage mage. This is spell damage for shaman. I think this is like, very good card, right? Like even if you don't have any spell damage with this, if you don't have any spell damage, it's pretty bad, right? Because it doesn't kill very much. That's the big problem. But if you do have spell damage, like deal 3, get 3 1/1s is super good. But like even without spell damage, deal 2, as long as you have some other way to like get a little bit of incremental damage to kill things in the early game. The fact that 2 damage kills like a lot of the common demon hunter minions, it kills a it kills a battle fiend, it kills blazing battle mage. But obviously the big power of this is the fact that it scales with spell damage because it's that many. This is implosion that you can actually predict. And Implosion was an incredibly powerful card in its day, and this is, with like less expensive, without the randomness, and with the ability to scale if you do have a lot of spell damage. So I think it's actually very likely to be pretty powerful. Next we have Primordial Studies, which can get you a discounted spell damage minion, which can go very well with your Molten Burst. It's called Molten Burst, right? Molten Blast, not Molten Burst. Either way. You can use this to discover a spell damage minion, have that minion discounted, play it alongside your Molten Blast, and boom, there you go. There's a ton of ways that Shaman has used spell damage in the past, back with like Spirit Claws. Even in the Spirit Claws metagame, you saw people playing Kobold Geomancers, right? Just so they could have their Spirit Claws online. And, I don't know if we're at the point of Kobold Geomancer world, but Primordial Studies getting you a Kobold Geomancer, is very realistically going to be something that happens. We may bring ourselves back to Hearthstone in, 2016? Whatever it was. Spell Damage Shaman is back. Why is Spell Damage Shaman back? Well, Ra's Frost Whisper has something to say. We talked about the spell damage boosting, Molten Blast. Well, this is a pretty powerful thing to boost with that as well. There's always actually just been like, a lot of just damaging spells in Shaman, right? Like a lot of cheap damaging spells, Overload and everything too. So, using spell damage is just like, get more powerful like Lightning Bolts, more powerful like Lava Burst, more powerful Raz Frost Whisper, clearing your opponent's boards. All those are pretty good. And, Raz in particular is obviously a huge payoff. If you do have spell damage stuff in play, you can wipe your opponent's board as well as end up, killing your opponent because it does damage to them. So if you end up like, building up a bunch of spell damage somehow, this is a tremendous finisher. And you can always just use, you don't even necessarily have to have cards for it, right? Because Shaman can just roll spell damage totem. And, back in the day with Spirit Claws, people were like, okay, no spell damage, and we may see the please don't roll spell damage totem happening again with Raz. But who needs a totem? Rune Dagger. 2-cost weapon, after hero attacks, gain spell damage +1 this turn. So this is effectively a 3 uses of spell damage that are guaranteed unless your opponent kills your weapon. And obviously weapons are much more difficult for people to remove than minions. You can't just attack your weapon. And, this, is, I think, really strong. Obviously, alongside your Molten Blast, you play this in turn 2, attack, you Molten Blast for 3, you can kill up to a 4 health minion, make 3 1/1s. You play this with Raz, you attack, you guaranteed to get 2 damage to your opponent's entire board. Really powerful. Now start mixing in spell damage, totem with that, and things kind of get nuts. So I think there's a lot of tools that exist for the spell damage shaman package, and I think this is one of the most important ones. I think that Rune Dagger, giving you a consistent ability to access spell damage that your opponent can't just remove by killing your minion, and that you don't have to necessarily play on the same turn, I think is a really big deal. So I think this is a very powerful card that may, not only see play in just spell damage shaman that's trying to use all these spell damage cards, but also just like in a burn style shaman deck, right? Like this may, make the like Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt, Lady Vash deck much more appealing because you have the ability to turn up the damage you're getting from all those sorts of cards. Next up we have Speaker Gidra. Talked about this in the Druid section, but in the Shaman section, very similar, right? I mean, Shaman is much more like the cheap spells than the big spells in Druid, but playing this with like Storm's Wrath, right? You play this, you play Storm's Wrath. The Storm's Wrath gives it +1/+1. It gives it +1/+1 from the Spellburst ability, and suddenly you have, a 3/6 Rush Wind Fury with a total cost of 4 mana. That's pretty powerful, not only as a defensive tool, but also as something that can, end the game pretty quickly because you're just Wind Furying your opponent's face over turns. So, much like I felt in Druid, it was a card that's going to see a lot of play. I think it may be even better in Shaman because you have, just so many natural ways to utilize it. Next up is Tidal Wave, 8-cost spell with Lifesteal, deal 3 to all minions. This is pretty expensive. Obviously, the fact that it's Lifesteal AoE is something that can really, really quickly get you back into the game, especially if you combine it with spell damage effects. But 8 is just expensive. 8's a lot. I do think this is something that you would still play in like a big spell controlling Shaman deck, right? If you're playing like, say, a Groundskeeper deck, this you can buy enough time, use your removal, and like, this can just absolutely close out the game against any kind of aggressive deck. Worth noting that you can, you are playing Shaman, so your hero power just makes little dudes that are on the board. So you're very likely to get even more life back from this than you would in a lot of other classes, a lot of the controlling style decks, because you just incidentally have minions in play that don't really cost you anything, and that your opponent isn't likely to kill that often. So this is not necessarily by itself going to be enough to like clear off a lot of boards at that stage of the game. But being able to both clear off the board and gain a bunch of life, even if it's not killing everything, can be a really big deal in terms of just like getting you back from a really disadvantaged position. So I don't think this is going to be like a card that sees tons of play, but especially in like a Highlander deck, right? Playing like one Hagatha Scheme, one Earthquake, and one of this seems very likely. So I do think this card is likely to see at least a decent amount of play. Next up is Totem Goliath. 5-cost 4/5 with Death Rattle. Summon all 4 basic totems with overload of 2, and it itself is a totem. So Totem Shaman. Here we go. This is just a like reload card for like a Totem Shaman type deck, right? Like one of the big problems that Totem Shaman decks I think have is the fact that like if they fall behind, if your opponent kills all your totems, you don't really have any way to get back on the board. You have to kind of slowly play out more totems. But this, you play out a Totem Goliath, and your opponent's like, okay, well, if they kill it, you just get a board of totems, and then you can buff your totems again. And also, like, it itself is a totem, so you can use this with Splitting Axe and get multiple copies of Totem Goliath. It's great with Bloodlust. It just naturally gives you things that, like, you have a board left over after your opponent clears it. It's just a pretty powerful card. I can think of just a lot of ways that you can end up using this. You don't even have to be like necessarily a totem-focused deck. If you're just like a deck with ways to take advantage of having a bunch of minions in play, whether it's Bloodlust, whether it's I'm trying to remember the name of the card that gives all your when you have Overload, give all your minions +1, +2, +0. But there's just a lot of ways for Shaman to take advantage of bodies in play. So Totem Goliath leaves you a bunch of bodies in play almost all the time. So seems like a pretty strong card, especially if you are very totem focused, because it itself is a totem and gives you totems. So totems for everyone. No, really, totems for everyone. This is even totems for Mage, Trick Totem. We talked about this in the Mage section. Weird card, obviously, difficult card to evaluate. I'm hard pressed to figure out if it's a good or bad card because the results are obviously so skewed. Seems pretty unlikely this is a card that sees like tons of competitive play, at least, because it does have very random effects. Wide range, can very easily kill itself very often. But certainly a card that's going to end up in a lot of highlight videos for ridiculous things happening. Next up we have Warlock, starting with Archwitch Willow. 9-cost 7/7 with Battlecry. Summon a random demon from your hand and deck. So this obviously is a big demon card. Lots of Warlock demons have various drawbacks like Pit Lord, whatnot. This is, just throw a bunch of big stuff into play. I don't really think there's necessarily like support for this right now. There's not really like big demon Warlock that is looking for, just one more card or something. Feels like it would be better in Demon Hunter right now, because there are a lot of good big demons in Demon Hunter and not really so much in Warlock. So I find it unlikely this will really find a home, but definitely a card to keep in mind for future sets, because if there are good big demons, this can definitely be a huge board swing in a single card. Next up is Bone Web Egg. 2-cost 0/2 with Death Rattle. Summon 2 2/1 spiders. If you discard this, trigger its Death Rattle. So this is interesting. Obviously a sacrifice zoo style card. Very good with Evil Genius. Very good with all kinds of sacrifice your stuff. It's literally like going back to like egg style zoo. But yeah, I think it's just like a very solid card, very difficult for decks to easily clear. It is a zero power thing, so a lot of Death Rattles run the risk of running the Shadow Madness. This does not naturally, so, you know, a way to protect your board against Breath of the Infinite and Holy Nova. And yeah, really creepy art. I watched the movie Arachnophobia when I was a kid and basically developed arachnophobia, and I got over it, but now I think I have it again. Next up, we have Brittlebone Destroyer. Talked about this a bit in the pre-section, but definitely I think a very powerful card in Warlock. There's a lot of ways that you can change your life total in Warlock proactively. Obviously, stuff like Flame Imp. There's a lot of ways that you know the sort of self-damage Warlock already has right now. There's like the Neversit Thrasher. There's the Vulture, Disease Vulture. A lot of ways that you can, you know, push the envelope with your self-damage stuff, and you know, this is just another payoff card. Very, very powerful. You know, really easy to enable alongside any of the self-damaging things, or obviously just your hero power, right? Unlike Priest, you're never going to be in a position where you can't use your hero power to activate this. Priest at full life can never like hero power heal themselves, kill your thing. Where obviously, I mean, you could be at 2 life and Warlock and not be able to do it. But using this, you know, just like turn 6 is going to be really scary for your opponent to ever try and play some sort of taunt, right? Your opponent's like, okay, I'm going to play, you know, like Emerald Explorer, try to defend myself as Druid. You're like, ha, that's dead. You're dead. So yeah, very, very powerful card. I expected to see tons of play. Next up is Demonic Studies. Discover a demon. Your next one costs 1 less. Maybe, you know, you're trying to build that big demon deck, but there's just not that many big demons. I'm not buying it. I'm skipping this class. Maybe I'll audit it, but not taking it for credit. Next up, we have Disciplinarian Gandling. Obviously talked about this in the pre-section, but this is where I think it really shines. This card in Warlock seems bananas. You know, like you're playing like egg-type Warlock, you're playing lackeys, you're like evil geniusing, making more lackeys, you're playing your Boneweb eggs, you're playing whatever, and they're all 4/4s, right? Like this is a, you know, just 4 cost 3/6, hard for your opponent to remove, and then you're like, all right, just play this, play a bunch of things that, you know, give me value, and then they also just turn into 4/4s. You know, I feel like the, you know, like lackey Warlock with the guy that like makes them into 4/4s already exists, and you just have like another way that, you know, even if you don't draw that guy, that all your lackeys are effectively 4/4s. Just really, really, really strong. I think this is almost outrageously powerful in Zoo Warlock. This is the sort of thing where you're going to be like, God, they drew Gandling. I couldn't possibly win. But yeah, really, really, really nutty. Next up is Philosophy. Talked about this a bit in Demon Hunter, similar to Warlock. You know, this, you know, maybe is good with like Voidwalker. I feel like there's just so many efficient minions in Warlock that you don't necessarily need this, and like the potential of having it kind of sit in your hand is a little bit awkward. It's cool, but like how good is this compared to just like having stuff that you could play by itself? You know, like you could obviously buff, like I said, Voidwalker can be good, buffed by this, but like maybe this is just like, you know, a great way to like get even bigger buffed stuff with like Scrap Imp. But like, what if you have like a Scrap Imp and then you have Philosophy and you just don't have demons in your hand, right? And you just end up having a Scrap Imp go off with philosophies that don't do anything. Feels like that's like a pretty big risk with this card, but yeah, you know, I definitely think that it has some potential, but I definitely think that the strongest version of like Zoo style Warlock feels like it's probably the Scrap Imp deck, you know, or like a Lackey type deck, and this doesn't really feel like it goes into either of those. So despite the card feeling like it's good, it kind of runs into problems of the other stuff that it would, you know, possibly compete with. Seems like it's better. But maybe, just maybe, it goes into your Archwitch Willow deck, and you know, just copy big things and then put them into play with Willow. Who knows? Next up, we have Flesh Giant. Talked about this quite a bit in the pre-section. Again, probably better in Warlock. This seems like it's probably at its best in some like plot twist Warlock, right? Where like you're life tapping and you're, you know, like getting your Brood Mothers and your Nether Breathing. Doesn't feel like it's really good in like a Zoo type deck because it seems like it's gonna get glutted in your hand. It's too inefficient. Even if it gets reduced like 4, I guess if it reduced like 4 times, maybe it's good. Maybe it's good in the Soul Fragment decks or something, because, you know, you just kind of go up and down. But yeah, I think this is definitely a really interesting card to try and build around to see how to maximize it. And it feels like, I mean, even if you just play this in Zoo, right? Like, say you just like play a Flame Imp on turn 1, life tap on turn 2, you know, life tap on turn 3. I guess you can't play it on turn 4 unless you like life tap again and then somehow have your mana back. Lots of ways to try and take advantage of this. It does feel like Plot Twist Warlock to me is the one that jumps out immediately as like the best way to do it, because you can also it's just another thing that you can have these big swing turns with your Plot Twist stuff going on. You know, you don't necessarily have to have like Alex Straza to have your big, you know, 0 mana push. It can just be like Flesh Giant or whatever. So pretty cool card. Definitely definitely expect to see some experimentation to find the best way to play it, but probably not Zoo. Next up we have Raise Dead. Deal 3 damage to your hero, return 2 friendly minions that died this game to your hand. My guess is that this isn't really a Zoo card. Zoo just can play more stuff rather than this. Feels more like it's a Flesh Giant deck card, a utility deck card. This can go into, it's obviously great with like Brittle Bone Destroyers. It's obviously great with like a lot of stuff. But if you just have like a bunch of low impact things, right? If you just have like a deck with a bunch of like Flame Imps and stuff, you're just gonna kill yourself trying to raise dead Flame Imps, right? I feel like it's much more effective in more of a like mid-range utility style of deck that has like higher quality average minions to get back with Raise Dead. And like if you just have an opening hand with like double Raise Dead or something in Zoo, you're just like, okay, well I don't get to do anything with these until they die, and that's a terrible position to be in with a super aggressive deck. So yeah, I feel like this is more likely to be good with a concentrated pool of things rather than just a bunch of small dudes, which is really what Zoo is. So definitely interested in experimenting to find out what the best place for this is. Next up is School Spirits. It's Moaning Myrtle right here. Deal 2 damage to all minions. Shuffle 2 Soul Fragments in your deck. So clearly this is the Warlock direction of Soul Fragments. This is a decent AoE effect. Obviously, the Soul Fragment deck is not Zoo. A pretty good control card against like a lot of the common minions that we see in the early games these days, like the Blazing Battle Mages, the Battle Fiends. Kills a Transfer Student, kills Fairy Dragon. Just a solid card. And frankly, like Warlock getting a decent AoE spell like this with upside is actually pretty good, right? This is kind of like Demon Wrath, except doesn't spare demons. And Demon Wrath saw a lot of play, even in decks that didn't really care about the fact that it spared your own demons. So the upside of the Soul Fragments is kind of a big bonus on top of that. And I expect, again, that the Soul Fragment deck is probably the best home for something like Flesh Giant, and I think this is a cool way to keep yourself alive once you try and get to that point. Next up we have Shadowlight Scholar with Battlecry, 3 cost 3/4. Battlecry destroys Soul Fragment in your deck to deal 3 damage. So decent stats. We've seen a lot of these like 3 mana 3/4s with upside, with a conditional ability. This is Battlecry destroy Soul Fragment to deal 2. So obviously you can't play this like on curve after the School Spirits specifically, but you can play it on curve after one of their other Soul Fragment cards. And obviously, just like, a decent way to either push damage to the opponent's face or help board control. So just a, pretty decent utility card in the Soul Fragment deck. So obviously, not going to see play outside of that deck, but likely to be a pretty powerful card in it. And of course, the hybrid payoff card, the Soul Seologist. For each Soul Fragment in your deck, summon a 3/3 Soul with Rush. We saw Soul Spirits, pretty good enabler for this. Again, pretty powerful. I like the balance of wanting to draw to your payoff cards and to have payoff cards that care about keeping the Soul Fragments in your deck before you draw them. Warlock being able to like life tap through your deck and life tap and then just get the life back with Soul Fragments puts them in a really interesting position to kind of like balance making those sort of decisions. Soul Fragments, of course, being 0 cost spells that are cast when drawn and give you 2 life. If you missed the explanation of them before, that's what it is. And yeah, I mean, this is, much like we talked about in the Demon Hunter section, this is a really powerful way to either just generate a big board on its own, or to react to your opponent's board because it does summon 3/3 souls that have Rush. So this can be kind of like a Dragon Caller Alana, or like, an answer to your opponent's big board. And we're back with another hybrid card that we were talking about. 2 cost, deal 3, shuffle 2 Soul Fragments in your deck. It's worth noting that 2 cost, deal 3 is actually a pretty powerful removal spell from Warlock standards. A lot of their classes get better than that, but when Warlock had like Dark Bomb, it was like premium. And this as removal spell you can play on 2 very frequently. A lot of Warlock decks, they want to just be tapping on 2. It's the best thing you can do. But having this removal spell that has upside enables your Shadowlight Scholar like this into Shadowlight Scholar on turns 2 and 3 can be a huge tempo swing against any kind of aggressive deck, and obviously set up the rest of your Soul Fragment cards as well. Our buddy who is dead inside, the Spirit Jailer. Talked about this in the Demon Hunter section, but Battlecry, shuffle 2 Soul Fragments in your deck, a 1 cost 1/3 demon. One of the interesting things about this being a demon in Warlock, if you really wanted to, you can Sacrificial Pact him for further ways to keep yourself alive. I don't know that we're necessarily playing this in like a Galakron type deck. Maybe you play like Soul Fragment / Galakron to get a little bit of additional action in there, but maybe too many synergy cards, not enough room for all of them to fit together. Yeah, I mean, this is, obviously just a decent early game control minion against like really small stuff. Pairs very well in Warlock with Mortal Coil to kill like 2/2s, and obviously sets up the rest of your Soul Fragment stuff. And last but not least, in Warlock, one of the big payoffs for Soul Fragments is the Void Drinker. 5-cost 4/5 taunt. Totally decent stats, but with Destroy a Soul Fragment to gain +3/+3. So this is a 7/8 taunt for 5. Basically an Earth Elemental if you have a Soul Fragment to eat. It's a really powerful card. You know, this I think is like the big tempo swing payoff. This and Shadowlight Scholar both obviously give you massive ways to brick wall aggressive decks. And this not only brick walls aggressive deck, but this is a big threat, right? A 7/8 minion for 5 mana is a very fast clock against a lot of aggressive opponents, or a lot of controlling opponents, as well as a big brick wall against aggressive opponents. So this is a huge payoff for the Soul Fragment deck, and I think between like this and I really do think that the Soul Fragment deck is a really good home for the Flesh Giants. Really powerful ability to not just defend yourself with the removal effects that you get from the Soul Fragments and the life gain that you get from drawing the Soul Fragments, but put a lot of pressure on your opponents as well. So I think this is going to be a really major factor in the Soul Fragment deck being powerful. We're on to the final class, which is Warrior. And we're starting things off with yet another study, Athletic Studies. We talked about these a lot. Discover Rush Minion. Your next one costs 1 less. Obviously, powerful tempo tool to enable you to get your Rush Minions out quickly. Being able to play this, say you're playing like Galakron Warrior, right? Discovering a Rush Minion, you get a Scion of Ruin, you get a Devoted Maniac. Or you can just make your earlier ones cost less. Rush is actually a fairly small pool, right? There's not that many Rush minions you can potentially discover, so you have a reasonably high chance of getting, those big things, the high impact stuff like the Galakron cards. We're playing Galakron like a Kargath Prime, for instance. So yeah, I think this is just a solid card if you are playing a deck that really cares about the Rush, and obviously just a lot of powerful Rush minions, like Restless Mummy, etc., etc., etc. So good card. Not something that I'm gonna like build my deck around. I don't think this is like as impactful as something like the Nature Studies at a Druid, where it helps you with your ramp getting discounted and things like that. But I think it's a pretty good one. Next we have Ceremonial Maul, a 3-cost 2/2 weapon with spell burst. Summon a student with taunt and stats equal to the spell's cost. This is we talked about this in Paladin. Similarly, reasonably good in Warrior. Playing this and then like brawling, you clear the board and have a 5/5, or clear almost all the board and have a 5/5. I think this is probably a card that was better in Paladin than it is in Warrior, because Warrior has just lots of cheap spells. It doesn't have that many like expensive spells that you play this alongside necessarily. It's usually more like 3-cost spells, 2-cost spells. Probably the best thing to use it alongside is likely to be Brawl. And you just have a lot of like Warrior typically is like fairly weapon heavy comparatively, so it could be more difficult to really justify using this in Warrior rather than Paladin. But it's definitely something to keep in mind if we ever see something like say a Commencement Warrior, as we we'll be getting to in a bit, as we talked about in Paladin as well. Next up is Coerce. 3-cost. We talked about this in Rogue. Destroy damage minion, combo destroy any minion. This is a more difficult card to use in Warrior than it is in Rogue. I do think that this is maybe a card that we'll see play possibly over Execute in the in Warrior decks that do have like Livewire Lance, right? I think that this is not necessarily a card that you want to play outside of a deck that has like access to lackeys, just cheap ways to enable this, because there's not that many like outside of lackeys, there's not that many like cheap things that you can play to enable the combo portion. That said, you can easily use the destroy a damage minion half in Warrior because you have so many ways to enable that as well. Whether this sees play rather than Execute in Warrior, which you can already use Execute, is unclear, but the ability to clear the way out, like say, especially something like the Divine Shield minions become popular, right? Like the Devout Pupil, having access to the ability to kill that without having to like double damage it, just being able to like combo off of like a lackey or something could be pretty valuable. So depending on, it's also interesting that they just sort of thinking about it more. If you just have the lackeys in play, you can always just attack into the thing and then execute it more efficiently. But if you have the lackeys in your hand, it's more efficient to like combo and kill it their way. It's interesting to see, how things end up playing out and which ends up being better, because I think there's a lot to be argued either way. Next up is Commencement. We talked about this in Paladin and a little bit earlier in Ceremonial Maul. I feel like in Warrior, this is going to be a hard sell right now because there's no other similar effect. Like in Paladin, there's currently Duel. So you can build a deck around Duel and Commencement, right? Whereas with just Commencement, what are you doing? how are you constructing your deck in such a way that like Commencement is a good card? It feels like it's difficult to like build like kind of a recruit warrior style deck like we saw in the past, when the only thing you have to go that way is Commencement. I guess there's also Dimensional Ripper, which is like, but that's a 10 cost card, right? If you're trying to like ramp out stuff, it's hard to start at 7 and then go to 10. You know, it's not nearly as effective as like duel into Commencement as your kind of curve with that, or like, you know, the Gather Your Party plus Woe Reaper like we had before. You know, I think this is a cool card. I talked about it in the Paladin section. But I find it difficult to imagine a world in which there isn't more support, at least in Standard. Obviously, maybe this is like another tool you use for like our Recruit Warrior deck in Wild, but I don't think we're likely to see that much use of it in Standard unless there's more options that do similar sorts of things. Next up is Cutting Class. Talked about this in the Rogue section. This is the hybrid card for Warrior Rogue. Draw 2 cards, cost 1 less for attack your weapon. You know, this could definitely see some sort of play in a Pirate Warrior style deck with like Arcanite Reaper. You know, you have Arcanite Reaper, you just immediately can cycle this off of that and draw 2 cards. Obviously also, you know, can be a cheap card draw effect if you have smaller weapons, right? This is less powerful than it would be in a world where Corsair Cache didn't get nerfed, because you can no longer like draw for super cheap off of like a Wrench Caliber or Livewire Lance or Ankar or whatever. But yeah, I think this is just a, you know, very solid card for an aggressive warrior deck or just a weapon-heavy warrior deck. And frankly, aggressive warrior decks and weapon-heavy warrior decks frequently are interested in card draw. This could even be a card for Quest Warrior, which unfortunately, you know, ended up getting a pretty big nerf from the Corsair Cache change as well, even though it was, you know, not necessarily the the deck that was in the crosshairs of that particular change. Speaking of weapon decks, much like in Rogue, Dr. Krastenov, a, you know, good opportunity to include buff those weapons, get your cutting classes cheaper. This dude must teach cutting class. He's got those cleavers. It's kind of his specialty. You know, just another solid card for an aggressive weapon-based deck. We talked about it in Rogue as well. I feel like this, you know, as a rush minion, you know, you can discover this off your athletic studies. You can play it for cheap off of athletic studies in Warrior, which is, you know, at least a little bit different. There's also some additional rush enablers. There's Playmaker, we'll get to in a bit, which can work quite well with Dr. Krastenov too. You know, I think it's pretty straightforward. You play in a weapon deck, this can be a really good inclusion. You know, do you play this and Captain Greenskin? Probably. You probably don't play Captain Hookcusk because, well, that's a Rogue Legendary and a Battlegrounds hero, not this card. Next up is Information. Or is it Information? 2 cost, add 2 random top minions to your hand. Meh. There's not that many like things that, you know, care. I guess there is Into the Fray, right? Like you could play this with Into the Fray. I was gonna say there's not that many things that care about taunt, but then I'm like, wait, I've played Into the Fray decks a bunch. But yeah, I mean, this with like Into the Fray, this with Armageddillo, those, you know, can possibly be ways that you can you know, help give that style of deck more tools. I don't know that that's necessarily, you know, gonna be any good, right? I felt like that the Into the Fray deck felt like it was like okay in the world where like you could play Bloodhoof Brave for the brief period where that was around, but there's just a lot of really bad taunts, you know, like you can get like Silverback Patriarchs, you can get like Shield Bearers, right? You get like really expensive stuff. Wouldn't you rather just play like Risky Skipper and Battle Rage than play this, you know? It feels like it's, you know, other than if you're playing like a fatigue game plan, probably not going to really pay off really that well. Next up is Lord Barov. Obviously talked about this a little bit in the Paladin section. In the Warrior section, Warrior has, you know, lots of ways to do the Whirlwind effect, not necessarily ways for the health set effect. So having the combination here is pretty nice. This feels like it's going to want to go in, you know, like a... I'm not really sure. Like I'm thinking about like what deck does this want to go in, right? Like it's obviously, you know, if you kill it itself, it just kills everything, right? Because it's a quality Pyromancer. You know, you can just play this like in a control warrior deck, and you can just use like a sword and board or whatever to kill this to, you know, guarantee you get the immediate clear right away. You can play this with like Risky Skipper and kill everything. I assume it works that way. Will the battle cry of this trigger? Yeah, the battle cry of this triggers and then the Risky Skipper triggers and those kill everything. You know, just a really, really powerful card, assuming you're in the market for a board clear. But a lot of warrior decks these days are very proactive. So you don't necessarily want to have this in your deck, right? Like a lot of warrior decks these days are actually very much about like getting and building a board. And if you play the Lord Barov and hit all your guys to 1, they're a lot easier for your opponents to kill. So I'm not necessarily sure that like this just goes into the current versions of warrior. It feels like it wants to be in a control warrior style deck. But at the same time, the warrior decks with Battle Rage Risky Skipper have so much card draw that like this can just be a card that could bail you out. You know, like some of them are playing Brawl right now, right? You just replace your Brawl with Lord Barov. So you can just like, you know, have this as a guaranteed way to clear off the board with a Risky Skipper or with like, you know, whatever form of removal that's much cheaper and much more reliable than Brawl. So it's obviously just a really powerful card, and you know, I'm more thinking of where do you put it in what way rather than will it see play, because it'll definitely see play because it's really good. And I was just discussing this. Playmaker, 3-cost 4/3. After you play a rush minion, summon a copy with 1 health remaining. So this is obviously pretty insane with a lot of rush minions that exist. You know, I was mentioning a little bit before with Dr. Krastenov. You can play like Playmaker into Dr. Krastenov, get a bunch of buffs. You can play Kargath Prime into this, you know, get like 2 Kargath with this, get 2 Kargath Primes in your deck. You can play this with like Restless Mummy. Your Restless Mummies just go nuts. You just get like 2 full Restless Mummies because they just reborn and everything. So yeah, this card is real powerful. Obviously, it's only really powerful against other minion decks. Although something like Restless Mummy, you know, you could just play Playmaker into Restless Mummy and you just have like 2 reborns. You just like proactively built stuff into, you know, on your board. So I think this is a really strong card. You know, it's just a very, very powerful card with the right framework around it. And there's a lot of good rush minions that this can go alongside. So I don't think this like naturally goes into any of the decks that like are played right now. It works with like Blood Boil Brute. You could like Playmaker into Blood Boil Brute, and that's obviously really powerful too. So, you know, I just think this card is just very likely to be really powerful, but I don't know where it necessarily fits or if any of those decks are really like that good, but this is a card that can make decks good. Next up is Rattlegore, aka the Control Warrior's Nightmare. 9-cost 9/9. Death Rattle, resummon it with -1/-1. So yeah, this is a card which is like real hard to kill. You know, you really want to silence this, and if you don't, well, good luck. This is like very much a niche card. You're only going to really want this against like control decks, right? It's so bad against an aggressive deck. It's, you know, so bad against like anyone who can transform it. Like this can get like devolving missiled, hexed, you know, polymorphed, whatever. And it's obviously much less less threatening. In a world where there's not that many silence effects, this is like a super strong way to deal with a opposing, you know, control strategy, but I find it unlikely that's a world we're going to live in. It's also true that like we live in a world where a lot of control decks are Highlander decks, and they can always find like a hex to deal with it too. Like I said, you know, in the right world where you're like control warrior versus control warrior, not dealing with many transform or silence effects, this is your guy. Next up is Reaper's Scythe. 4-cost weapon, 4/2, with Spell Burst, also damages adjacent minions this turn. This is a really neat card. This is something that like makes you possibly want to play like a card like Athletic Studies, right? Because having a cheap spell that you can play alongside this to enable the Spell Burst, you know, can help you get back on a board where you're significantly far behind. The cleave effect at this low cost is extremely powerful, and yeah, I just think this is a very powerful card. You can, you know, half the games you can enable it with coin. Although you can't coin into this, you have to play this then coin, which is a little bit awkward. You can use this in the sort of weapon decks we talked about with like Cutting Class. You could play Cutting Class for 1. Enables your spell burst, and you draw the 2 cards. You know, very powerful at enabling like a control warrior type strategy. Very powerful at enabling like a mid-range tempo type warrior strategy against aggressive decks. Also, if you just have ways to buff this, it's just a 4-power weapon for 4, right? If you play this alongside like the Dr. Krastenov, or, you know, alongside Captain Greenskin, not Captain Hoodka, Captain Greenskin. You know, you could just get a lot of damage to your opponent's face too. You know, it just hits pretty hard. So I think this is a really, really good card that will not only like, you know, help power up, but I think help encourage particular deck types like those sort of tempo mid-range control warriors. Next up is Shield of Honor. Give a damage minion +3 attack and Divine Shield. Talked about this a little in the Paladin version, or Paladin section, about how I don't think it's very easy for Paladins to use. I think this is very easy for a Warrior to use, and very scary. Warrior with Battle Rage and Risky Skipper can just draw so many cards, and with Bloodsworn Mercenary and like Inner Rage, Rampage, you can just like make such scary boards really, really cheaply. This is just another thing that can be a cheap way to help buff like a charge minion too. You can have Kor'kron Elite plus Inner Rage plus Rampage plus plus Copy It, blow you up. There's just a lot, you know, a lot of ways that you can enable these like big charge damage copy combos. You know, I don't know if this is a card that's just gonna be like honestly played very often, but specifically the existence of Battle Rage enables you to play situational cards like this much more easily in Warrior than you can in, say, Paladin, because you draw so many cards from your deck and can assemble those combos so much more readily. Next up, we have Steel Dancer. I talked about this a bit in the Rogue section as well. I think it's a real powerful card. If you're playing a weapon-based tempo style warrior deck, this is just really good. You can play a Reaper Scythe into this, clear your opponent's guys out, and then play 2/4, like a 4/4 and another 4-drop. Really, really powerful. Really good tempo. So yeah, I think that this alongside Reaper Scythe, alongside Cutting Class, is a lot of tools that will help enable an entirely new style of archetype. Maybe that's still like a pirate warrior type deck, and it's not like totally new, but it has these really powerful new support cards. And last but not least, Troublemaker. 8 cost, 6/8, and in your turn summon 2 3/3 ruffians that attack random enemies. This card is actually it seems like it's an 8 cost, 6/8. It's but it's the summoning 2 3/3s that's going to keep doing every single turn is a pretty big deal. And it's random enemies, so this can be just a finisher and control warrior, right? Like if your opponent has nothing in play, you play this, and you immediately have a 6/8 and 2 3/3s that attack your opponent in the face. This seems super strong as a top end for a control style deck to finish off the game, because you do a bunch of damage right away, and then have a board that's divided across multiple bodies. That's really, really powerful. It is kind of like a Ragnaros, right? Like Ragnaros is an 8/8 that does 8-1 thing. This is a 6/8 that can attack and, can send in your little dudes to help clean up a smaller boards or just crush your opponent's face. So I think this card is actually, my initial impression when I looked at it was it doesn't seem that good. But then I thought about it more. If your opponent doesn't kill this right away, it is real hard for them to deal with it, right? If you have a taunt in the way and they can't kill this, or you just play it and the ruffians kill their guys that would otherwise possibly kill this. I think this feels like a really good top end for control, and I do expect this to see quite a bit of play. Well, I do expect it to see play in that style of deck, or even as a top end of mid-range warrior, right? Say you're playing the Reaper Scythe deck I'm talking about, and it's okay, you have your early game hack and slashing through their stuff, and then you top it off with this once your opponent's used a lot of their removal on your Steel Dancers, Steel Dancers and minions generated by them and everything. So it feels like it is a really tough card for your opponents to deal with at that point.